Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the LCI Green Room. I am Jacob Winograd, host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, which is part of our Christians for Liberty network. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, you can check us out at libertarianchristians.com. Figure out we have a lot of articles, podcasts, books for sale, including this one, Faith Seeking Freedom, which is libertarian Christian answers to tough questions. And we also got a pretty cool merch store, including these cool little whiskey glasses that we have with our branded different podcasts on there. Tonight's guest returning to the show is Dave DeCamp. Dave is the news editor at antiwar.com, and he is my source, and if he's not yours, he should be your source as well, for daily coverage and analysis of U.S. foreign policy and what's going on around the world. Dave, thanks for joining us again. How have you been doing?
Good, Jacob. Thanks for having me back.
Yes, of course. And man, as we were talking before the show, we go live. I appreciate all the work you do. I know it's pretty hectic, and I kind of feel like I don't know. Like before, this would be a good intro question, and get your thoughts on it. Because maybe I'm wrong, but I almost feel like when Biden was in office, there was stuff going on, but all you had to really worry about was sort of like just reporting on what was going on, because Biden was so, I guess I wouldn't say he was completely inactive. There were some things he did and said, but it was nothing like Trump, who was just all over the place constantly. And so it's just like for every piece of newsworthy, some kind of story that gets reported on, it's like you have to cover it. Then you have to cover the interviews about it. You have to cover the what Trump said, what people are saying about Trump said. I always feel like Trump is this weird, like, for better or worse, amplifier of what's going on with foreign policy, which I suppose could have a positive effect if more people are paying attention, but then a negative effect if at least people, on one hand, maybe his followers are just inclined to just accept anything he says, and then on the other side, they're just inclined to just oppose anything he says. So not super helpful. What are your thoughts on that? Just just like the transition from your job now with Trump in office compared to when Biden was.
Yeah, well, I mean, Trump is like constantly talking to the media, which does make things difficult to follow. And I think that's part of his strategy, is to kind of keep everybody on their toes, because he'll be, it'll be like after just before midnight or something. And you'll see he's just talking to reporters in the Oval Office or something. And he says, he says very conflicting things often. One thing that we've been covering since he came back in is he was talking about like slashing the military budget in half, reaching this big deal with China and Russia. But then he goes ahead and requests a $1 trillion military budget, the biggest, for the first time. And this is something I remember from the first administration, is that he was just, he says one thing, he does another, but then, he kind of reverses things a lot. It's like you have whiplash, because he'll say something that sounds good. You're like, oh, that sounds great. But then he ends up doing something else. Or there'll be a report saying he's going to, do this. And it, you write that up like, oh, hopefully this happens. And then basically the exact opposite thing happens. So yeah, it really is tough to follow. And I'm starting to remember, when it comes to like the military spending thing and this talk about getting rid of nuclear weapons, like all that stuff sounds great. If the president says that, I think it is worth covering. But it made me think, like, was he saying all this stuff in his first administration too? And I looked back, because his first administration, he pulled out of all these arms control deals, at least two major ones with Russia. But he was also talking about how they should get rid of nuclear weapons. Like, so he kind of was doing the policy he was actually enacting was the opposite of this thing he was claiming he wanted to achieve. So yeah, it is tough. And people also always want to give Trump the benefit of the doubt. And I'm guilty of this as well. Like, this idea he'll say something or do something and people will be like, well, no, it's not, that's not really what he wants to do. He really wants peace, even though he's bombing all these countries and all this. And it's like, people never give Biden, never gave Biden that benefit of the doubt, or Obama or anything. It is kind of a thing unique with Trump. There is like kind of something about him that I know obviously he triggers a whole bunch of people. You know, there's one side that no matter what he says, they say is horrible. But then there does seem to be a lot of people who just like, they just want to believe that he's like a good, that he really wants good things, even though while he's doing all these really, really destructive things.
Yeah. No, it's really tough, and he's such a wild card that I think, especially when he was campaigning, he was throwing so much, libertarian or libertarian adjacent rhetoric around different things. Not so much Israel, but at least with Ukraine and Russia, and even some people saying some. I've heard like not really from him, but sometimes people in his orbit who sometimes would say the right things regarding Iran, and other times not so. But I feel like it's tough as libertarians, and I wonder sometimes if this is part of what I fell into the trap of. But like, we're so used to not getting much that all it takes is someone even just saying things that are different enough from what the status quo usually is and closer to our perspective, that then we feel inclined like, oh man, I almost want to give him a chance, like at least it's different. The other day, like, I'd been really down on him for a few weeks because just everything coming out of Israel, which we'll talk about later, has not been good. And then I was really disappointed that it seemed like he was not making headway with Ukraine and Russia. And then he made a post a couple weeks ago where he basically walked through like how horrible the war was and how it's really like the fault of Biden and Zelensky, and that they had opportunities for peace, didn't take them. And he was like calling out Zelensky for talking about Crimea and bringing up stuff that like not many people know about, like the military base that uh, Russia had there for the longest time in that region, which he was like, Trump was like, listen, like this is more complicated than what people make it out to be. They've had these territorial disputes and this kind of mixture and messiness for a while, and and at the end of the day, we shouldn't be involved in it, and people are dying. So like, I was like, when he says stuff like that, it's great, right? You're like, that's amazing that he's putting out that kind of message to so many people. But then the follow through, I think it was like within a couple days of that, he was like meeting with Zelensky and going, actually, I think Putin's kind of screwing me over. And so, maybe I'm going to backtrack some of my, comments about, but, and then as you alluded to, then people go, well, maybe he's just saying stuff. And it's like, I don't even know how you can make predictions, because it's just like, and I don't even know if Trump has a process or if it's just literally like he's making it up as he goes along, which is that's what I think, is he's just making it up as he goes along, for better or worse. Is that, what would you say? Is that your sense, or do you, and I'm sure there's also like, tons of, establishment bureaucracy and lobbyists who are pressuring him as well. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Ukraine, it doesn't seem like there is like a real plan here at this point to really end the war. At one point, it looked like he was willing to do what was necessary, which is cutting off military aid and basically just forcing Zelensky to negotiate. But now that's not happening. So, yeah, I really don't know what his plan is right now, if he really has one, especially. And this is something we could get into when we talk about Ukraine. We have this minerals deal now, and these signs that the U.S. is getting more bogged down in Ukraine. Um, I don't know if that was his plan all along or what. But yeah, I remember that post you mentioned. He said, he pointed out that Russia took Crimea without firing a shot. And yeah, these things are good, but then what does this turn into? So far, not much.
Right. You brought up the minerals deal, which I think is a good thing to talk about, because I've heard a lot of different coverage from both mainstream / corporate media and also libertarian and alternative media as well regarding this minerals deal. Some people think, like, I guess there's an upside to it, where at least we're recouping some kind of value for all the money we've dumped in there and gotten nothing in return for. But then I've heard other people say, well, for one, Ukraine doesn't even have that many rare minerals to give us, and two, that this is, uh, at best, just Trump kind of getting played, and it's like the sort of setup for making it more difficult for him to be able to, as you said, do what it would take, which is that if Ukraine and Russia, and especially Ukraine, don't get serious about coming to a deal, saying, all right, well, you guys can continue fighting, but we're going to withdraw uh, support, whether that's through weapons, the sharing of intelligence, and things like that. So like if we're kind of complicated with Ukraine because of this minerals deal, that kind of change the calculus and ability for Trump to do that without some kind of major blowback. So what's your sense of this deal and how good or bad it is, and from those different perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing, I think that the main thing that we should be aware of is how, so from now on, well, once the deal is ratified by Ukraine's parliament, once it goes into effect, if the US gives Ukraine military aid, then it counts toward a contribution to this investment fund that they created. So it's not like they're getting anything back. It doesn't apply to any previous aid, so it's not like they're getting anything back from that. And then at the same time, I mean, it's not like, who's getting a piece of who's really going to get a piece of these minerals and everything? I mean, I don't think it's going to go back into our pockets or anything. And it really does seem like it is committing the U.S. to still, being involved in Ukraine. And, you mentioned some of the specifics about like where exactly the best natural resources are in Ukraine. Most of them are in eastern Ukraine, as I understand it, and in parts controlled by Russia, and also areas that aren't, that aren't safe because there's a war going on there. So that's another aspect of it. But really, I mean, I think the bad thing about this is, again, it's giving Trump this excuse to kind of continue this proxy war. He's got his neocons, Marco Rubio, who are now probably telling him, oh, see, we're getting something out of it. We can just keep it going. We'll just keep sending them weapons and everything. And then we've seen moves in the past week. Just the other day, the Trump administration, the State Department, approved an arms deal for Ukraine for their F-16s, for training and maintenance for their F-16 fighter jets. So that's a sign that they're preparing for long-term military support. There's another arms deal. We don't know the details of it that they notified Congress about. And these are the first actual arms sales to Ukraine under the new Trump administration. So it's right around the time this started, right around the time they signed the minerals deal. So it does look like the deal was, it's not written in the deal exactly, but we've seen these comments from Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, and even things that Trump have said, that part of this deal is us committing to continuing to fund, to arm Ukraine, to give them military support. And then we see all the rhetoric from Trump and Trump officials now saying that they're, that they might walk away from the negotiations soon if a deal isn't reached anytime soon. And it's tough to tell, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't look like any kind of agreement is going to be reached anytime soon. So I think there is a chance that they abandon the peace process and we just go back into this war, and this will just be the way things are. There's just this war in Ukraine going on. And for from Ukraine's, for their purpose, I mean, if they don't make a deal now with Russia, things are just going to get worse for them. It's very clear. So the thing to do is to make Zelensky, who has a big incentive not to make a deal, because then he's going to have elections and he's going to lose, and he's going to be remembered as the guy who lost this war. The thing to do is to put real pressure on him, like Trump did after they had their little argument in the Oval Office, and cut the military aid. I mean, if not, things are just going to get worse for Ukraine down the line.
Yeah. I think this is tough. I want to get your perspective on this, because you and I are both Christians, and I've talked to a lot of fellow believers about this, and they have this, especially those of us here in the States. They have a hard time with this narrative, because even if, like, I've had conversations with my pastor and members of my church, and they'll even acknowledge a lot of the facts on the ground, right? That, like, yeah, the American government and NATO were not very considerate, to put it mildly, towards Russia and Russia's security interests. And we're not acting, as a benevolent force in all this. They were acting out of selfish ambition. The building of, the dual purpose rocket launchers in Poland, for example, being, quite provocative, and that, we wouldn't put up with that. But then they still fall back on this. Well, but all that aside, can we really just say Russia invaded and they get to just get away with it? And is that right to, like, shouldn't, we as Christians and by extension, I guess America, have some role to play in the international theater, so to speak, to say that like if you invade a country that shouldn't be allowed to stand to pass, even if America is maybe hypocritical in that regard, considering how many military interventions that our government and the military have been involved with over the last, I mean, I don't know, 7 decades since the end of World War II. And I guess I hear that, but my concerns is like, and I'm sure you would agree, it's not any of our positions that it was good that Russia invaded Ukraine, but I, I, I guess like even though I'm as a Christian, we tend to, I guess there is that pull to view things in a lens of good versus evil, but I just don't think that international politics on this scale and this conflict neatly boils down to that in any way where you can say like it's so clearly that Russia is pure evil and that Ukraine and America are just pure good and purely innocent, that the price of Ukraine's sovereignty is worth, how many thousands of people are dying per day as this war wages on to decide who rules over the, I mean, it's not nothing, but it's not, it, it does amount to mainly just a small section of land. I mean, I don't know, like the size of New Jersey, maybe, or something close to that. And a lot of them are ethnic Russians anyway. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the sort of concerns that people and even sometimes fellow believers have?
Well, it's like I said. I mean, if they don't make a deal now, it's just going to get worse because nobody's in a position to stop Russia, militarily without it leading to nuclear war. I mean, that's just the reality. And that's why, if they pursued peace talks from the beginning, I mean, I think the biggest scandal of the Biden administration should be the fact that they discouraged those peace talks in early 2022, when, according to the Ukrainian side, Russia's main demand was Ukrainian neutrality. And they would have withdrawn from the territory that they captured. Now, there was still details to work out, including they wanted to impose some limits on Ukraine's military. That was Victoria Nuland's excuse for discouraging these talks. But the fact is that they would be a lot better off than they were today. And this is part of the responsibility that Zelensky has as a leader of Ukraine. And if you want to talk about Christian Catholic just war theory, I mean, one of the big tenets of it is believing that you have a reasonable chance of success of actually winning the war, which even at that time, even though the Ukraine did better than expected, with the initial invasion, there was still nobody seriously thought that they could win. I mean, I guess that's probably what the U.S. and the
Well,
UK.
Douglas Murray thought they could win, but
that's right, yeah, because he saw it with his own eyes. Yeah, that's the funniest thing. So yeah, because like after that whole thing with Dave Smith, it was so funny because I went to look at his column from the time, and the way he worded it, he literally said, "Russia can win. I know because I saw it with my own eyes."
Right.
And yeah, he was wrong.
Ukraine can win. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Ukraine can win. So
if he would have said that, it would have been like a Freudian slip.
Yeah.
No, you bring up just war theory, and I'm I want to ask you if you haven't, I don't know how much you've studied just war theory. I've tried to study it a lot. I think Augustine was like one of the first ones to really talk about it, and then I think Aquinas, a few others have done work on it, because I see a lot of people like invoking that, including like James Lindsay and others. And there was this big challenge James Lindsay put on Twitter like a couple weeks ago, like you libertarians, like you come up with a workable, realistic just war theory. And I was like, I don't need to come up with a new one. I'll just use what you're invoking and tell you to like follow the standards, which like one of them being, yeah, can you win? Another one being like, have you exhausted all options for peace? Which like I guess you can't run the counterfactuals to know, because people say, well, what if Russia was lying? What if the deals weren't acceptable? I was like, I don't know. But the point is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain that there was actually no official communication between the White House, or at least the top executives in the White House, including the president, and Putin and Russia until Trump took office. Like, I think Biden did not have any conversations with Putin at all, which is just absolutely crazy to me, right? Like, I mean, I think the idea of war, you're going to have to wage it, should be in self-defense, but like we shouldn't relish violence and war because of the death that comes. And if there's ways to avoid it, to come to peace without that option, especially when you know you can't win, and the only way you can be competitive is with a lot of help, and there's nuclear war on the table. It just, I don't like. I guess I want to be sympathetic to people who have a hard time grasping with that, but I kind of think the reason they have a hard time grasping with that is because they've been taught a very cartoonish version of American history, where it's the good guys always win and America's always the good guys and we're the force of good in the world. And it's hard to just let that go. Um, I mean, it wasn't that hard for me, but I guess it's harder for others too. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, again, I mean, the responsibility of the U.S. With this war, as you mentioned, Biden didn't speak with Putin once after the invasion. Blinken barely spoke with Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. I mean, they spoke for like a few minutes about like a prisoner swap. But yeah, I mean, if they really wanted to end the war, as you said, you exhaust all options. They would have been, there would have been kind of a dual effort. Say they still wanted to support Ukraine, they would have been sending them weapons, but also working for a diplomatic solution. If that's what they really wanted, was peace, was an end to the invasion, which is clearly not what they wanted. They wanted to basically just fuel this war. I mean, what was their whole slogan during the thing? Is, oh, we'll support Ukraine for as long as it takes, and they never laid out what does victory look like. So it was very clear that they had an interest in prolonging this war, which is incredibly immoral. But I mean, maybe that's a tough argument to make to the types of people that you are talking about, because it does sound really scandalous, I guess, the idea that the U.S. purposely prolonged this war. But I think that's very clear based on the evidence. Again, they weren't actually trying to end it. They were just fueling it. They're just dumping weapons in. And the fact that there was no diplomatic effort showed that they really didn't want to end it. So I think kind of maybe stressing that point is good, because it is really evil what the U.S. did. And that, but again, at the same time, the Ukrainians, I understand why people are sympathetic of them with Russia invading and everything. So it is kind of a tough needle to thread. And for a while, I mean, the first days of the invasion, a lot of people were very mad at us for our position, readers of antiwar.com, because we were just saying, and stop, cut off Ukraine, stop this is crazy. A lot of people who were, anti-war leaning kind of fell for the propaganda and supported this proxy war. But as the years have gone on, it's become much clearer, what it really was, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be careful as Christians, as libertarians, as those who oppose war, to, just take the real world dynamics and situation for what it is, and not what we wish it would be, right? Like, I mean, we can wish all day that Russia didn't invade Ukraine and that Ukraine's borders would be respected, and we can try to like wish like, oh man, it sucks that America, like, when you learn about all the ways in which America and NATO for really decades, as I think the last time I had you on the show was when we were talking about Scott's book, Provoked, and the whole history of that conflict. And that's, again, it's tough, but I don't know. I mean, I also don't know why it has to be tough. I mean, just look at biblical history. I mean, the kingdom of Israel was rife with, like corruption and disobedience and whatnot. And, America is not some special nation that's immune from, uh, imperialism and the temptations to use power towards the benefit of a few, not the benefit of the of everyone, right? I mean, that's public choice theory right there. You talked about like blowback, so to speak, from anti-war people over your Ukraine stances. I haven't gotten too much of that, but I will say the other thing I want, the next topic, I've gotten a lot of blowback from my we're covering it here at LCI, and that's what's going on between Israel and Gaza. And I mean, that's even more of a hot button issue in political and religious circles, obviously. Uh, I had kind of hoped, little tangent, but it's related. I'd kind of hoped, and this was like a, making do with what I had, right? Again, just accepting things for what they were. And I was like, I hope Trump wins because I think like he might just go along with maybe this idea that like we're going to end the Ukraine Russia stuff so we can just focus on Israel in the Middle East, which wouldn't be great, but like, hey, we can just like end one war even if it's people doing it for the wrong reasons. That would have been great. Hasn't happened yet, unfortunately. Seems like we're content to, at least for now, continue saber rattling at multiple points. And I haven't even been able to cover the Asia pivot in a while because we can't even talk about the Asia pivot while Ukraine and Russia and Israel and Gaza and Iran and Yemen is all going off so much. But what's going on with the Israel stuff? I hear like just if it was last night or today. I always get the time zones mixed up. I guess there was a recent like missile strike on like an airport or something, and I know there's that whole situation's got super complicated after the ceasefire ended and Yemen started attacking the Houthis started attacking the trade routes again, which people don't realize that that's connected, right? Like it's never reported in the mainstream news. It's just like, oh, these Houthis are just like for no reason at all hijacking ships and bombing trade routes and whatnot. Never mind they stopped for the entirety of the ceasefire. But what's some of the major highlights going on? And I mean, I know it's kind of bleak, but we should talk about it. And yeah, so go ahead and give us kind of the rundown on it.
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on, but I'll start with Gaza first because the situation in Gaza right now is horrific. We're starting to see babies starve to death. And
you shared a picture today, which was just
pictures
harrowing.
coming out.
Yeah.
And it's essentially the situation for mothers is they're suffering from malnutrition, so they can't make breast milk. Israel's not letting anything in Gaza, so they can't get baby formula, so their babies are dying. And this is something that happened pretty badly last year as well. And now it's a total blockade. Nothing is getting in, and it's been over 2 months like this. And the charity kitchens are shutting down. The bakeries shut down already. So basically the Palestinians that don't have money to afford to buy things, and the prices are like insane. They're starting to die. Their children. Right now, I think the numbers like they say 57 people have starved to death so far. We don't know exactly what, but there's been just the past couple of days, there's been reports of several babies dying. And this is just a result of the Israeli blockade that the U.S. is backing. So it's really horrific.
Right. And this blockade, I think it's important to note, and I think this happened a couple of days ago, but they're not just blocking efforts. Like there was I think a civilian operated aid ship bound for Gaza that they basically drone striked and sunk the ship, burned it down. That was just bringing humanitarian aid. I mean, it's just just gruesome stuff, right? I mean, it's one thing to say, I don't know, if you're going to say that Israel has to be doing this to Gaza, like, okay, I don't agree with you, but at least allow some aid or assistance to come in to those who are trapped there. Do you think, I mean, is this ultimately the blockade and the starvation thing? And I think some people have kind of said the quiet part out loud, but is it basically like trying to force them to accept relocation to somewhere else, you think?
Yeah, that's part of it. So a big thing that happened today, or it was like very early in the morning on Monday, the Israeli government approved a plan to really ramp up the attack on Gaza. And basically it's for full military occupation, take over all the remaining territory and push all the Palestinian civilians into one single humanitarian zone. And this is what the Israeli officials have said publicly is happening, that they're taking over. Axios, Barak Ravid, who's like a former Israeli intel guy who writes for Axios now, he just had a report from his sources in Israel saying that the plan is to level every single building in Gaza and move all the Palestinians to one area. And basically when they're in that area, then encourage them to migrate, which is how they put it. They frame it as voluntary migration when clearly it's ethnic cleansing under the threat. If you're being told to leave under the threat of death, it's not migration. And it's also, they're making the place completely uninhabitable. So that, I mean, it says they're going to flatten every single building, destroy every single building in Gaza. And they've done this in a lot of Gaza in what they call the buffer zone that the Israeli military occupies. They've destroyed every building. So that report says if some sort of ceasefire deal isn't reached by the end of Trump's visit to the Middle East, he's going to the Middle East from May 13th to May 15th, then they're going to launch this. And there's no sign that there's going to be any kind of hostage deal, because Hamas's position, they've been offering to release all the hostages in exchange for a permanent ceasefire. Israel has rejected that. And Israel's made some offers of like temporary ceasefires, but basically Netanyahu, Smotrich, other members of his government have been very clear that their long-term goal is military occupation and ethnic cleansing. So Hamas isn't going to go for anything that's temporary at this point.
Can we pause there just for a second? Because I like to bring this up whenever I can, because it is completely like, I'm trying to think of the right word here. It is a fatal blow to the narrative, to the propaganda that like Israel says, we're doing this for the hostages. Like, we're going to keep going until every single one is free. Like, they're literally using the hostages as the rallying cry for this war, for this occupation and blockade. But they haven't even actually, like, and there were, I think, some hostage exchanges during the temporary ceasefire, but like, they haven't even, because again, people, I know the objections, right? They'll be like, oh, you're going to, negotiate with terrorists. You're going to trust them to keep their word. Well, first of all, we do have past precedent, which I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, would tell us that they often do very readily return and trade hostages and whatnot. And the point is, like, you haven't even seen if they will follow through. Like if the goal is to rescue the hostages, then why wouldn't you? If you're concerned, if you have leaders who their primary concern is returning those hostages who have been, I guess, kidnapped for, a year and a half or so now. If I have my time right, it's hard to keep track. Yeah, I guess because it was October 7th, 2023. It's May, so I mean, yeah, geez, it's gonna be 2 years before you know it. But yeah, so the point is, you're not exhausting all options to get those hostages back. And I mean, I think there's plenty of the families and loved ones of the hostages who are really not happy with what Netanyahu and the Israeli government has, not done in terms of actually trying to get the hostages back. There's also the concern that just the total leveling of Gaza, how many of the hostages have just been killed. So I think that, these are things that have to be brought up and talked about whenever it's being discussed, because it's just people, that you just hear these slogans repeated. And if you don't know sort of things you're talking about, I think it's easy to get swept up in that. And it's not to justify what Hamas is doing, but like, if you're going to say Israel is a, the Israeli government is acting again on the idea of just war theory and acting with the idea of peace and protection in mind, doesn't really line up with the facts on the ground, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, Netanyahu just recently said that the hostages aren't his main goal, which has been very clear for a long time, but he outright said it publicly. And if it was his goal, they would have implemented the full ceasefire deal. That would have freed all the hostages. That they were, Hamas was releasing hostages, and instead now they're killing the hostages. There was the American citizen, this kid named Edon Alexander. I think he's like 21 years old. He grew up in New Jersey and moved to Israel and joined the IDF, and he was captured on October 7th. According to Hamas, which, so this isn't confirmed, but they said that an Israeli airstrike hit the area where he was being held and that they lost contact with the people, the guards holding him. So it sounds like he was probably killed by an Israeli airstrike, because that's what happens. Massive bombing campaigns are not the best way to get hostages back, or neither is starving them.
Right.
So yeah, it's very obvious that that's not what this is about. It's ethnic cleansing. Genocide is the goal. They want the Palestinians out of there. They want to conquer the territory. and that's what the Israeli government wants to do. You do see the hostage families; they want the deal implemented. Um, and I mean, what we're just seeing in Gaza every day, just so many people being killed and babies starving to death, and this still goes on somehow. And what what I think Hamas should do, they should surrender and come out and offer some kind of deal, because I do believe at this point that Israel can probably carry out a total genocide and ethnic cleansing. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that, because the question is, where are the Palestinians going to go? I mean, what country is going to take them in? We don't know that. But we see a lot of people, there's been this narrative that Israel can't defeat the resistance. But again, we see what they're doing in these buffer zones. Well, if you go in there and literally demolish every single building and seal off whatever tunnel entrances are there, then they can literally conquer Gaza if the U.S. lets them do it. And it looks like we have a U.S. government that's willing to let them do it. So I think nonviolent resistance would be the path forward for Palestinians. I mean, they've basically won the world over. Nobody's backing Israel here except the U.S. But that's not going to happen. Realistically, Hamas isn't going to do that. So same thing with Russia. You got to deal with what you really have. And a deal. I mean, and it's just absolutely horrific. And what people need to understand is, like, the way like a Western, like a typical guy in the U.S. who doesn't know much about this might view Hamas as this crazy terrorist organization. Think about how the Palestinians in Gaza view the IDF and view Israel. I mean, that's a terrorist organization that has the ability to kill them all. That's the big difference between the IDF and Hamas.
No, I mean, and I don't want to get too off into a tangent on the history, but and I talked about this in a recent episode of mine, and I was referencing Daryl Cooper and that his series Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem. And what I did was I kind of, in this, if you've listened to it, like in his first episode, he opens up with sort of a very like dramatic retelling of like a Jewish family who goes through a pogrom, and just how horrific that was. And I basically did that, but like in the position of like a Palestinian father, because I think people don't realize how, like, and there's that question, like, what would you do? And you brought up like peaceful resistance. And so again, people don't know the history because they don't pay attention. They'll be like, well, if the Palestinians thought they were being treated unfairly, like, what was October 7th was resorting to, what Hamas has done, the right response. And I would say it's not. But again, we have to try to have more than just like a fifth graders level understanding of like human nature and psychology. And like, they have tried peaceful options. And the most famous one being, I think, was it 2018, the March of Return. And I mean, just completely peaceful demonstrations. They were not armed, just walking to the barriers and the gates, and they were just completely shot down and mowed down by the Israeli, security that was stationed there.
That's an important point.
Yeah. So it's like, does it mean I agree with what Hamas did on October 7th, where they broke into Israel and did kill a lot of innocent civilians and kidnap them? No, not at all. And now, granted, you always have to couch that with like not giving into the sensational reporting, right? The whole like beheaded babies thing, which has been debunked, and the numbers which were exaggerated. There's like the crap. What's the doctrine where they shoot
the Hannibal directive?
The Hannibal directive, right? On top of just like normal accidental, crossfire in the heat of a breakout situation. So like all that, but at the end of the day, again, nuance and not giving it sensational takes of it. It's still like objectively evil what Hamas did, but you can also understand how some of the Palestinians thought that they had no other option. And there's still plenty of Palestinians, including many children, who don't really have any agency in this, who, it's not like they voted in Hamas, right? It's not like they're responsible for this situation. But I mean, I don't know, like, what do you think? And someone asked here, Dave in the comments, they asked, Dave, do you think Israel at all cares about the optics of what they're doing? I mean, I don't think they do. And I don't think they care about the blowback that's going to come, because they always have the U.S. support, which is like the ultimate trump card to just keep doing what they want. Which did you catch that whole or just like even the clip of Matt Walsh talking to Tucker Carlson, and the whole thing that like if a country cannot survive without assistance from another country, it
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
deserve to exist. And Matt was like, but I think Israel could continue to exist without U.S. support. And I guess I kind of agree, but like they couldn't exist on the terms that they're doing right now.
yeah. No, no.
They'd have to change how they treat their neighbors, because without the U.S. intervention, which is more than just the direct intervention of aid to Israel, but how much, and maybe you can speak to this because I think a lot of people are unaware, how much the U.S. is involved in getting the other countries in the region to go along with what Israel is doing, even though that wouldn't necessarily be their first move.
Yeah, I mean that's why Jordan and Egypt, two countries that neighbor Israel and the Palestinian territories, are get billions of dollars in aid from the U.S. each year. That's literally the reason why. So they go along with what's happening. Um, but yeah, I mean the that's what this aid that the U.S. gives Israel allows them to do. It allows them to do what they're doing in Gaza. It allows them to invade southern Syria. It allows them to expand settlements in the West Bank. If they didn't have all this support from the U.S., they would have had to rein, especially right now, if say U.S. aid just was cut off, they would have to stop pretty much everything that they're doing and figure out how to, build up their military that's not relying on U.S. equipment. I mean, I don't think people understand, like, pretty much all of Israel's planes are American, which means they rely on the U.S. for maintenance, for spare parts, so they can keep flying in the air. I mean, if you lose that support, then you don't have an air force. So yeah, it's huge. And that's what's so shameful about this, is that Trump could get on the phone and say, hey, let the aid in, stop this, just implement the ceasefire deal that we got you to sign in January. And he has the power to do that. The fact is, though, I mean, it's tough to like imagine where this could go, where there really could be peace in either Gaza or the West Bank at this point. And I think now the question about the optics, like, now that you have a Trump administration that's not pretending like they care about the humanitarian situation like Biden did, and Biden at least made them let some aid into Gaza. Obviously, it wasn't enough, but now that they have Trump, just not even clearly doesn't care. Then they don't care. They and that's been kind of the talking point from Smotrich, from kind of the more extreme elements, is that like this is our opportunity with this Trump administration to do what we want, to cleanse Gaza and to annex the West Bank.
Yeah. No, I mean, and so the same commenter made this point, which I think this will be the last thing we'll talk on, one of the last things we'll talk on Israel, but because I want to talk about Iran, which is related. But he said insurgent math only goes so far, and for those who don't know, so that's, and who was it? Was I know it was the
What's his name?
Iraq
Crystal,
general,
right?
yeah, McChrystal, who said that like what is like 2 minus 1, and it's like it's 4. Right, because like
Yeah,
he's like, for every
basically.
terrorist go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, for every terrorist you kill, you make more because they're families.
Right,
So
right.
that's a good
So the
point,
idea,
because that's kind of my point here, is that according to the Israeli intelligence, there's more Hamas fighters now than there was when they first started, than there was on October 7th. And that does go to show, you kill all these people, you kill all their families. What other recourse do they have? And
right,
I do think, Piers Morgan said something interesting once. I forget who he was even talking to, but it was one of these crazy debates or something. And he said, he was asking, a critic of Israel. I think it might have been Scott. Maybe that's why I was watching. So on October 7th, of course, you have all the history with the occupation, with everything. But October 7th happens and Israel has to do something, right? Like there has to be a response. So all that stuff is irrelevant to a point. And, I would reverse that point now and say, like, forget October 7th. Look how many people they've killed in Gaza. If you were just a regular dude in Gaza and your whole family was slaughtered by Israel,
yeah,
of course you're going to join Hamas. You're going to join whatever the armed resistance is. But yeah, if they go in with the bulldozers and clear and demolish every area and bomb all the other areas while they're doing that, then I think because Gaza is so small, I do think that they could actually achieve, genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza. A lot of people
Right.
don't think they can, but I do think it's possible.
I think it's possible, but to the commenter's point here, he said that you kill everyone in the area and the insurgent math doesn't matter, but you may see foreign insurgent math and not domestic, which is, I guess, I kind of share your concern that
Yeah.
Gaza might sadly be a lost cause, and the Palestinians, whether they're killed or relocated, it'll be an ethnic cleansing. And I'm at the point where I'm not sure what the point in not calling it a genocide is. Uh,
Yeah, I mean,
other
when you see
than
the kids, like what's happening right now with the kids
yeah,
starving and everything. But
I sometimes avoid
insurgent
using the
math,
word. I sometimes avoid using the word genocide because I don't want to have a debate over the definitions. But just personally, like that's how I see it. But like, I just don't think the any amount of U.S. money being thrown at this region and whatnot, like again, maybe they'll wipe out resistance in Gaza, but for the long term prospects of peace in the region, the long term ending of radical Islamist terrorism and that region accepting Israel, like I don't see how this is helpful at all.
yeah, well, I mean, the Arab leaders like really are total puppets of the U.S. I mean, they're really not doing anything except for the Shiite axis. But you talk about insurgent math with Yemen. I mean, what the U.S. is doing in Yemen is
Yeah.
just building up the Houthis' base, just bombing it and killing all these civilians, and not. I don't think they really have any idea what they're hitting. And you mentioned the missile strike. The Houthis are just like they seem to thrive under bombings and sieges. They were just able to strike Israel's Ben Gurion airport like directly with a missile. So now then today, the U.S. and Israel bombed Yemen together, it looks like, in really major airstrikes. So everything's just escalating. And as you mentioned earlier, the source here of the Houthi attacks is what's happening in Gaza. So you get a ceasefire in Gaza, the war in Yemen can end, and it'll just bring regional calm. But if we continue on this path to get into Iran with the continued genocide in Gaza, the bombing campaign in Yemen, and no nuclear deal with Iran, then I feel like a war with Iran is probably inevitable, which is not good.
No, and Iran has always been kind of the I don't know, if it's a chess game, it's kind of the king you're trying to checkmate, so to speak. I mean, and there's that what the PNAC and the other neoconservative think tanks, and you had the plans to invade. What was it like? Do regime change in, was it 5 countries or 7 countries? And
Yeah, 7. Yeah, and
it was
Iran's
7.
been like
Yeah,
the big
Iran's like
prize.
the big prize, like the final boss, so to speak, for a while. Because all the other countries, we've either had regime change or at least like U.S. intervention causing total catastrophe and chaos, like in Syria. Um, but uh, but yeah, so how does Iran fit into all of this? And are you similar? Like I'm so frustrated at like I would hope in this day and age, especially after the COVID lockdowns, that we would see a rise in Americans being skeptical and willing to like not just buy propaganda, but like we have US intelligence reports confirming that we have no evidence that Iran's building uh nukes or that close to it. And I'm sure I made this joke on Twitter, I think a week ago. It's like I think Iran's been 3 weeks away from having nukes for 15 years, 20 years. Like my entire life since I've been paying attention to foreign policy, Iran's always been like, oh, they're just a few weeks or a few months away from building a nuke, right? So it's just uh kind of like how global warming is always going to flood the earth in 5 years. Anyway, how does Iran fit into uh all of this? I know Israel's had a little bit of flirtation earlier in the year with some small skirmishes or strikes in Iran, but are things continuing to heat up there? And I know Trump's talked about, made some pretty scary remarks in terms of uh, if Iran doesn't, I just bow down to America's and Israel's demands regarding the nuclear program, that uh, he's been at least very willing to flirt and float the idea out there of military intervention. So uh, it's not comforting stuff to hear. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, Israel wants the U.S. to go to war with Iran. They want to attack Iran, and they want U.S. support because that's the only way they could really do it. I mean, they did launch some airstrikes in Iran after kind of the back and forth last year, but they want a big attack. The pretext is to destroy Iran's nuclear program. The reality is Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program, but they do use kind of the threat of it as leverage over the U.S. to try to get sanctions relief. So we've seen them increase uranium enrichment and everything, and they've done that in response to Israeli sabotage attacks. So the pressure and sanctions on Iran has always led to an increase in their nuclear activity. So the way, if you really care about them not having a nuclear weapon, the way to achieve that is through diplomacy. But I think Netanyahu sees the opportunity to get this, what he's always wanted is the U.S. to try to, to go to war with Iran, to bomb them, to make them kind of, I don't know if he really believes regime change is attainable, but I think, heavy bombing campaigns to kind of hurt Iran. But the reality is that would lead to war. Iran would obviously retaliate and probably kill hundreds or even potentially thousands of Americans at all the different bases in the region that are in range of these Iranian missiles. So Trump has been threatening, like you said, if they don't reach a deal, he's going to bomb Iran. And I think he's serious about it because he's currently bombing Yemen. I mean, to like a really crazy degree. I mean, they've been bombing Yemen every day since March 15th. They're using 2 aircraft carriers and B-2 bombers that are stationed at Diego Garcia. They are really like pounding the country, and they're blaming Iran for the Houthis continuing to launch attacks, which isn't exactly right. Iran does support the Houthis politically, and they certainly have provided them with military support, but we don't know the extent of that. And what we do know is that the Houthis have their own domestic missile and drone program, meaning they have their own weapon supply. So this idea that Iran is fueling this just isn't true. And even Trump has acknowledged that the Houthis make their own missiles, but we've seen threats from Hegseth, even from Trump, saying that that they blame Iran for the Houthi attacks and that there will be consequences. So there's these 2 kind of paths toward war with Iran, either the deal falling apart, or them just getting frustrated with Yemen and taking it out on Iran. I think that's something with this Houthi missile strike on Israel. Netanyahu's probably trying to use that to convince the U.S. to support an attack on Iran. And so I think there's a real risk here of war. And the big thing is the deal. If there's some kind of nuclear deal, then war will be avoided. But at this point, Trump the other day just said he wants full dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program. They can't have a civilian nuclear program, which is just a complete red line. Iran's never going to go for anything like that. So if he's saying that publicly, and there have been negotiations going on, but they've been postponed, and then we've seen all these threats, and it's just, things are really not looking good here. And I think, unfortunately, it looks like Trump is listening to the worst people he can be on Iran. I think his lesson from hitting Soleimani was that, which is the Iranian general he killed back in 2020. Iran responded by firing a volley of missiles at a U.S. base in Iraq, which hurt some. There was traumatic brain injuries, but nobody was killed. So then that was that. But I think the lesson that Trump learned from killing Soleimani is that he could hit Iran hard and there won't be any consequences. And I think that's what people are telling him. So I think he might believe that they can launch like a big bombing campaign to try to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, and that'll be that. I think that's who's in his ear right now. So it's not good.
Yeah, I mean, I pulled up a map because I just think, like, if you've been paying attention at all for the last 20 some odd years, it's like we couldn't succeed in Afghanistan, which is to the right of Iran here on the map, and we couldn't succeed in Iraq, which is to the left side of Iran. But you think we're going to pull off an even, bigger operation here in Iran. And Iran is not Iraq or Afghanistan. right? Like Iran's actually got, I mean, I'm not saying like, if I guess if you did like a war games calculation, I guess America can win, but it would have to be more than just a military operation. We'd be talking like full scale war, and there would be insane casualties. And
Yet
yeah, I
I
mean, it
don't
would not be
see
good.
any scenario where like the US tries to like invade Iran. I mean, it's just not feasible. But I said, I could see Iran hitting American bases hard, the US bombing Iran more, maybe some
Yeah.
ground fighting in Iraq. I guess Iran lost its ally in Syria, but certainly there could be some ground fighting in Iraq or something, or kind of on the border. But like a full, I mean, it's just not. That's just not. Like nobody, the American people have no desire to go to invade Iran. I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't matter what they think, because we're in this era now where the president can just bomb a country to start a war. They don't even need to do the
Yeah.
propaganda campaign to get Congress to authorize it. They could just start launching airstrikes. But yeah, like the U.S. military doesn't have the will to invade Iran, but this could turn really ugly in the region until one side is ready to back down. But
Well,
there, a
and
lot
I
of
just,
people will be
yeah, I
killed in
mean,
the process.
I guess as we're coming to a close here, I mean, just like when is enough enough? Like we have been politically and militarily intervening in the Middle East since the 50s, really. Um, really before that, and Britain has been too, right? I mean, it's just the West has been meddling in this area for so long. I always like to bring up the King Crane Commission. That like people like to just rely on this kind of lazy collectivism, right? Like they hate us for our freedom. It's like, no, they actually used to love us for our freedom. And they started to hate us because we've been over there, as Ron Paul said. They don't hate us because we're free over here. They hate us because we're over there and we've been through blockades and through drone strikes and military bases. We've been killing them and occupying them over there for decades and doing regime change over there. So uh at some point, I don't know, like, do you think there's ever going to be, because I do get the sense more now than ever that people are kind of fed up with, even if they don't have like our full anti-war convictions, they kind of are tired of the endless war. But are we ever going to have enough, I guess, like, populist backlash to really convince the elites and those at the top to pull back what they're doing? Like, is that the way politics even operates anymore? Because I'm not entirely sure. And uh, I don't know. It feels like we're just playing with a lot of chaotic elements here. I mean, I've done this before. I think even when I had you on the show, where you just pull up a map and you just kind of look at how all this stuff is actually very close to each other. I mean, the map I just had before, you can see just north of Iran, you got Georgia, you got Armenia, and just north of that is Russia. So I mean, like, and I'm not saying it's like, I'm not trying to draw crazy, conspiracy theory connections here. I'm just saying, like, you know, at what point do people ask, what right does America have to say this is the way the world has to be? It has to be the way we say it has to be, and we have the right to have our military involved in all these different ways, and contributing to just thousands upon thousands of civilian deaths. And at what point are we, like, we can't see into the future, but we know that like I kind of feel like we're just, you know you keep messing with volatile elements and chemicals like this, and putting more pressure, more heat, more interventions. Like it's hard to say, like, and I don't want to be all doomsday or doom and gloom, but like it does occur to me that we don't necessarily know the bottom of how bad things could get if we continue down this trajectory. Like it just seems like, and again, like I think I don't want to do like the the meme where I'm like, World War III fear mongering, right? But it's also not impossible. And at the very least, is it not insane that we have government leaders who are just so casually saber rattling all over the place as if that's not a legitimate risk to be concerned about? So, what are your thoughts on that? I think I might have lost him. Looks like his screen froze up. I'll read some comments while we're waiting for his signal to restore. Can you all make sure it's not on my end? Can you all hear me? Is he frozen for you guys too? Okay, I think it was him because he just cut out. So we'll wait for him to come back. Yeah, as a impure hunter said, yeah, not only is Iran larger, but it's mountainous. It ain't no, yeah, it's a lot harder even to do missile strikes and stuff. I mean, it's much more heavily fortified, and like it's going to take just a much stronger show of force to try to have some kind of a sense of a mission accomplished if they were to do some kind of intervention in Iran. That's absolutely crazy and insane, in my opinion. I mean, I guess to just go on ranting here while I'm waiting for Dave to come back. Yeah, I mean, as a Christian, I think we have to ask ourselves, like, if America is a nation of supposedly Christian values, of predominantly Christians, right? And I don't like to mix America and the church or anything like that. That's not my intent. But I just have to, like, especially as Christians, like, what should we advocate our governments to do? Should we advocate our governments to be like this involved in the world towards the deaths of this many people, or should we at least our prayer and our hope be that they would do something in the pursuit of de-escalation, in the pursuit of uh, like what are they actually trying to gain here? Like, is government some kind of force that like let me put it this way: the propaganda I think that we were always sold growing up, right? Especially like I remember I was in third grade when 9/11 happened, and then all these interventions were sold on the idea that, well, if America goes over there and intervenes, that it'll spread democracy in the region and that it'll be this force for good. But does anyone believe that propaganda anymore? Because I just think that, like, it's just, if you've looked into this with any amount uh of vigor, right, with intellectual rigor and trying to dig deeper, you see that uh that's really not the reasons for these interventions. These interventions are largely for the purposes of control, for the purposes of maintaining America as a global hegemon, right? This global power, and it's not produced more peace. Because I think, like, the neocon apologia on this is that, like, you need America to be this global police force around the world, because otherwise you get a lot of conflict. But it just seems like, and the world's always had conflict insofar as the world's always had sin. It doesn't seem like building a giant world empire has gotten us any closer to peace. And not only has it not gotten us closer to peace, but the same apparatus that is going around contributing to the deaths of hundreds of thousands around the globe, that same tyranny is then being turned inward against the American population. Because there's no such thing as a small, limited, constitutional republic that's a giant global military empire. Like this, those things just don't go together. I'm gonna mess it. Dave said his internet went out. So I'm gonna go for 10 more minutes, and then if he can come back for closing thoughts, if you can make it back for closing, great. If not, no worries. So we'll see if Dave can make it back. I think he was having storms in his area, which might have knocked out the internet or something. So that's too bad if he can't make it back for closing remarks, because I love Dave and I'd love to give him the last word to say something more profound than I can say. But let me read a couple more comments here. Yeah, I agree. You can either have an empire or you can have a republic. There's no in between. And listen, like, if you're a republic, if you're a limited government and you are a nation that exudes the principles of liberty, then I think that can have a there's a role for that playing some sort of positive effect on the global stage. So maybe you shouldn't have entangling alliances, in my opinion, but if other countries are having disputes, you can be like an objective third party uh, arbiter to help bring peace. You can be a beacon of light, a city on the hill, so to speak, to tell people like, hey, we have all this prosperity because of our commitment to liberty, because of our commitment to our values, especially if it is a quote unquote Christian nation. I don't like saying I'm not a Christian nationalist, but sure, imagine if we were a Christian nation and uh we were known for how free we were, how committed we were to God and serving the least of these, to the our all the humanitarian aid efforts that we do voluntarily through churches and private organizations. But instead, and we kind of used to have that reputation. That's my point in the Middle East. We used to have people, for those who don't know, the King Crane Commission was basically like post World War One, and the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and the Western allies are trying to divvy it up and figure out who's going to be kind of responsible for which area, and uh, these different colonial powers would sort of then install local leaders and whatnot, but they'd still be in charge, like whether it was France or Britain. Um, and when they were polled, this big commission that went across these different regions, they were asked, who would you want to kind of be your overseer in a kind of League of Nations mandate? They overwhelmingly voted that they would prefer the U.S. to be charged over Britain or France or any of these other countries in Europe, because we were seen as the good guys, right? They didn't hate America for our freedoms back then. They were like, we love America because they're free. And now they hate us because we're over there, as Ron Paul said. Uh, and as much as I wish, yeah, you can say, well, even though we've made mistakes, can't we do the right thing now? Well, to do the right thing now would mean you'd have to do a 180 and repent, right? You'd have to actually say, we're going to make atonement for the wrong we've done. But you can't while you're still ongoingly doing and committing the injustices, then say, but we're going to come in here and act as a force for good. It's just, it's just disconnected from reality. Yeah, it looks like Dave's still having issues with his internet, which is definitely sad. I might have to close the show up without him, but I will just say, first of all, everyone, make sure, and I'll put that back up here, whether you're watching this on X or YouTube. But if you go to X, you can follow Dave at DeCamp Dave, and definitely go to antiwar.com and look up his channel, Antiwar News, the daily news show, usually released in the morning or the night before. Definitely the my number one source. And then I listen to two daily news shows devoted to foreign policy and international events, and that's Dave's show, and then also the Kyle Anzalone show. Both of them work at the Libertarian Institute. I like to think of them as our, we're like a sister organization, the Libertarian Institute and the Libertarian Christian Institute. And yeah, there's been a lot of storms, so I don't think Dave is going to be able to make it back, unfortunately. But everyone, make sure you give him a follow. Make sure that you are subscribed to this channel wherever you're watching, the Biblical Anarchy channel or the Libertarian Christians channel, wherever you're watching this. And you can check us out at libertarianchristians.com. And if you want to support the show, support what we do here, subscribing, liking this, sharing it around. And then if you want to support us with your dollars, you can go to libertarianchristians.com/donate. And if you sign up for $10 or more a month as a monthly donor, you become a LCI insider. And that nets you all sorts of goodies, including discounts on merchandise, free ebooks, early access to content, that kind of stuff. So I think that's all I have for you guys for today's episode. I think it was a good conversation, despite the anticlimactic ending with Dave getting cut off before he could answer that last question. But definitely be getting Dave back on the show at some point, as well as the others at the Institute. And I will be back again Thursday night. Who am I streaming? I will be. Well, so I haven't decided yet. I'm either going to be back Thursday night, or I'm going to record Thursday night to release Friday or this weekend with Jim Babka of the Grace Archie podcast. And so we'll have a good conversation, I think, talking a little bit more about Trump and the libertarian perspective on Trump and why some people voted for him and things like that. Also, while I have you all here, let me check something really quick before I sign off, because okay, no, we did it. So the LCI account just passed 4,000 followers. But for those of you watching, which quite a lot of you, if you haven't already, go over to @LCI official and give that account a follow. That is our official Twitter account. And we are generating all sorts of content. We have a lot of different shows. There's my show, the Biblical Anarchy podcast, the flagship show, the Libertarian Christians podcast. We have the Protestant Libertarian podcast. And then, of course, here we have the live show, which is the Green Room, and a lot of other people who are contributing different content, articles, books we're releasing. So definitely, I think, worth a follow, worth your time if you have enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, anyway, that's all I have for you guys. Sorry that Dave got kicked out at the end, but I think you at least got the headlines of what's going on. And if you want to continue to get those headlines, again, follow him at DeCamp Dave, and that's antiwar.com. That's all I have for you guys for tonight. See you again later this week. Live at peace, live for Christ, and take care.